Hi, I'm Mark Scandrette. I'm a writer and teacher based in San Francisco, and I'm passionate about helping people apply the teachings of Christ to the messy details of everyday life. Today, I want to talk to you about the beatitudes. About 7 years ago, I was sitting in a London pub with two friends of mine, and they said, Mark, we want to do a project about these words of Jesus that are at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. We think that they might really speak life to issues in our world today, and particularly to emerging generations who have withdrawn from the church or from Christian faith, or who frankly feel like some aspects of Christianity almost seem toxic, like not the good news. And so we started looking at the Beatitudes there in that London pub. And I said, you know what this project reminds me of is years ago, when I wrote my first book, a Zen Buddhist priest contacted me by email and said, Mark, I saw your book at a bookstore here in San Francisco, and I thought that you might be a safe Christian for me to talk about something going on in my life. He said, I had a Christian experience as a teenager, and but there was some things that weren't healthy about the group that I was part of, and eventually my spiritual longings took me away from Christianity and into Eastern philosophy and practice. He said, I've now been part of a monastery for 15 years, and I'm about to go through ordination, or what's called Dharma transmission. But whenever I sit zazen, that's his term for meditating, I hear Jesus calling to me, and I don't know what to do about that. Could we talk? Well, of course, I emailed Shinko back and said, come on over to my house and share some food, and we became fast friends. And I remember over that first meal together, I was trying to check out, does Shinko have the right beliefs about Jesus and scripture and faith? And so I was quizzing him a bit. And so I said, Shinko, what do you think of Jesus? And he paused thoughtfully for a moment, and then a tear began to flow down his cheek. And he said, I adore Jesus. I don't know if you or your church would consider me to be Orthodox, but all I know is I'm in love with Jesus. So on the second time Shinko and I got together, we went for a walk around my neighborhood. And incidentally, going on a walk with a Zen priest is a bit like having a really cute baby or a dog with you. Everyone wants to engage, and people would smile at us respectfully and sometimes bow. But as we walked around the neighborhood, I turned to Shinko and I said, Shinko, I'm not that familiar with faith traditions outside my own. Can you help me understand something? When you wake up each day, what do you seek to do and to be as someone who considers themselves to be in the Buddhist way? In about 4.5 minutes, Shinko answered my question. He shared with me the Four Noble Truths, and then something he called the Ninefold Path. And he said, Mark, I wake up each day and I try and deepen my experience of these 8 paths of wisdom. Well, I was really impressed with how succinct and detailed his response was. Well, then he turns to me and he says, Mark, you identify as a follower of Jesus. When you wake up each day, what do you seek to do and to be? He asked me the same question I asked him. I hesitated for a moment thinking, okay, now it's my chance to tell him my testimony, how I came to believe in Jesus. But I realized that wasn't really the question. The question was, what do I do today to follow the way of Jesus? So I thought I quickly recovered, and I said, Shinko, I wake up each day to love God with my heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love my neighbor as myself. And I sort of patted myself on the back, congratulating myself for giving what I thought was a truthful answer. But there was something that haunted me about it. My response, I think it was true, but it was sort of 30,000 feet, very meta, while Shinko's response was very detailed. I could imagine what he would actually do each day to follow that path. And that got me wondering, was my answer vague because Jesus wasn't very specific about what it means to follow his way? Or had I just not learned to pay attention to those places in Scripture where Jesus gives us wise instructions about how to live in kingdom reality? And reflecting on it a bit further, I realized that in my upbringing or discipleship up to that point, most of the emphasis was on either the past, events from 2,000 years ago, or the future, what would happen to me and where I would go after I died. But so much of what Jesus talked about as he traveled throughout Galilee had to do with life in the here and now. And that's the part that I hadn't paid as careful attention to. And that's why I'm so excited about this teaching about the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount, because Jesus really does have answers and paths for us that can meet those deep needs and aches and longings that we experience in our lives. Well, my mentor Dallas Willard would often say that the Sermon on the Mount is the best record we have of the curriculum for Christ's likeness. And so as we go through each of the Beatitudes, I'm going to introduce a kingdom of darkness posture, what our natural or instinctual first tendency is. And then I'm going to invite us to consider the shift that we could make through the power of the Holy Spirit and cooperating with that and leaning into it, into a new posture for life. This will become more clear as we go through each of the individual Beatitudes. So the first Beatitude, Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." What does it mean to be poor? Poverty is when you don't have enough, or you feel like you don't have enough. Something is lacking. So I'm going to ask you a question right now. Where in your life do you feel like you don't have enough, or that you are not enough? When we think about those things that we experience as lacks in our lives, and we all have them, and then there are people that we're aware of around the world who are in the middle of a refugee crisis or a struggle in a war, or are experiencing places of great poverty and famine. When we come into that awareness of not enoughness, our first instinct is to close our hands. I want you to do that with me right now so that this message really sinks in. To grab and to grasp, hoping to get what we want, to hold on to what we have, and to not share it with others. Psychologists call this the fight or flight response, an increased level of anxiety. Keep holding your hands like this and consider, how does it feel to hold your hands in this posture? My fingers right now are feeling tense and tight. They're aching a bit. That's the posture of scarcity. But Jesus is inviting us back to the deeper reality that although we don't have enough on our own, we live in a world created by a good creator who has our best interest in mind, who provides for us. And that creator is inviting us to move from this posture of worry and anxiety into a new posture of openness and receptivity, to receive what we need with gratitude when we feel lack, to ask, seek, and knock, and to learn to be generous and to share what we receive with one another in an open-handed way. Jesus modeled this for us. There's a story where he was out in the boat with his disciples and a huge storm came up. They're all freaking out, close-handedness. And Jesus, what's he doing? He's in the back of the boat taking a nap. What did he know that they had missed? He knew that we live in a world where our Creator loves us, that this is a safe universe to live in, that not even death can separate us from what is most essential to our well-being. And so we're being invited with this beatitude to move from close-handed anxiety to open-handed trust. Do not worry about your life, what you'll eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear, Jesus says later on in this great sermon. But seek first God's kingdom and justice, and all these things will be taken care of for you. We're invited to live and pray this prayer. Hold your hands out with me and pray it. Lord, lead us in the way of trust. In the second beatitude, Jesus says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." This one strikes me as funny. If Jesus was going to be a celebrity advice giver or guru in our time, I don't know if it'd be wise to lead your great teaching with "Blessed are those who mourn." That's like saying, "Happy are those who are unhappy." Well, so many hard things happen in life. And our first tendency when we encounter difficulty is to want to run away and escape from what feels too hard to face. Think about if you've been on a bus or a train or a plane and a young child starts to cry. We all do what we can to comfort or distract them. And you and I, as we grew older, we found our own strategies and our own expert ways to run away from what we feel is too hard in our lives to face. Maybe if I scroll a little bit on my phone, I won't be thinking about that problem in my life. Or maybe there's something that I could eat or drink that will help bring comfort to me. Now, there are obvious necessary comforts, but most of us have found things in life that end up being compulsions that instead of offering true comfort to us, end up helping us to avoid pain. And with this beatitude, Jesus, in his great wisdom, lets us know that avoiding pain never really heals it. Anyone who's in recovery knows this, that in order to deeply heal from pain, we have to face those things that are hard. And instead of pushing them away, to actually sit with them. Ancient people knew how to do this. They would tear their clothes and throw ashes on their head and cry out to God in complaint. "God, where are you? Have you fallen asleep? I need you now." And they would face into it. Jesus modeled this for us. He looked out over Jerusalem and he wept over the injustices of that great city. Even on the way to raise one of his best friends, Lazarus, from the dead, he sat at the tomb and wept with Lazarus' sister. And the same promise is true for us, that if we have the courage to face our pain instead of running to it, we may experience the true solace and comfort we desire. And so our invitation is to move from this posture of avoiding pain, to face pain with the hope that God can meet us in those quiet places. And I know I've experienced this, and many people that I've walked with have experienced this. One of my great teachers about this has been a group of Aboriginal friends in Australia who I got to spend some time engaging with the Beatitudes with. And when we got to this Beatitude, they said, "Oh, we know all about mourning. Our people are constantly dying. Some of the Western foods we've learned to eat actually make our bodies sick. And our community really struggles. So we spend a lot of time at hospital or at the funeral parlor because so many of us are going through difficulty." And that broke my heart to hear my friends in so much pain. And I think many people of privilege like myself, we do everything we can to avoid pain. And it seems like one of the invitations of the gospel is to face into not just the things in our lives where we feel pain, but also to get in touch with the aches that are in our world. And so a question like I often ask myself is, Where is my heart breaking? What are those places of pain and sadness and injustice that are breaking God's heart that maybe could break my heart as well? And to really sit with that. And that might be the doorway to embracing God's comfort, but also would activate us to work on behalf of those who are in suffering and struggle. And so this beatitude invites us to live and pray this prayer. Join me in this posture and pray with me. Lord, lead us in the way of lament. The third beatitude, Jesus said, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." Well, meekness sounds like weakness, and so this gets a bit confusing to us. I think our first instinct is to make comparisons and measure ourselves by one another. Do you remember doing this as a child? Who's the tallest? Who's shorter? Who's the fastest? Who's the best at math? The best at sports? Who's the most attractive? And we sort of rank ourselves in terms of greater than and less than. Psychologists suggest that we do this as a way of trying to help form our identity. It's a way that we're asking the question, who am I? And if many of us struggle or strive to get on top, to be the best, others of us have tried and we sort of think, I can't do it. And so we resign ourselves to a lower status position. Is this a wise way for us to try and build our sense of worth? And I think Jesus would say to us, it's not a true and reliable way to build your sense of who you are. Just comparing yourself like this. I know how it is for me. I kind of think I'm not that bad. I'm of a looking guy for somebody my age, and I'm trying to eat right and try and exercise. But then I'll see somebody else who's my age or older who looks a lot fitter and maybe has stronger muscles and a better body mass index. And then suddenly I feel a little bit diminished. Or I think about in my career, I feel pretty satisfied with the books I write and the impact I have. But then I'll talk with a friend who writes books and they sell 100, 1,000 times more books than me. And I start to feel a little diminished and less than again. Jesus invites us to build our sense of who we are in a whole new way, to develop a new posture instead of competition and comparison, to move to honor our inherent dignity and worth. So I want you to put your hand on your heart right now, and I want to remind you of what Scripture says about you. You could repeat after me. I am made in God's image, and I have inherent dignity and worth. Now, if that's true about you, it's also true of every person on the planet. So if you're listening to me and you're close to someone else right now, I want you to turn to them and repeat these words. You are made in God's image, and you have inherent dignity and worth. We need to be reminded to move from competition and comparison to honoring who we are as the sons and daughters of our Creator. This beatitude, that reality of inherent dignity and worth, invites us to live and pray this prayer. Put your hand on your heart and say this with me. Lord, lead us in the way of humility. Jesus obviously modeled this for us in his life. Even though he was the exact representation of God, he humbled himself and walked among us and lived as a servant. And he invites us to have that same kind of flexibility and honor for others in our lives. Well, the fourth beatitude, Jesus said, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice. Our first instinct when we look at the overwhelming problems in our world, I think, is to throw up our hands in apathy. How could one person possibly make any difference with the amount of struggles that we have in this world? And to that impulse towards giving up, Jesus says this: you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Let your light shine so that others see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. We're not helpless. We're not hopeless. You and I have the power to do good. And so I'm going to invite you to cross, instead of throwing up your hands like this, to cross your hands over your heart. Think Wakanda or Wonder Woman. And let's remember that we were made just a little lower than the heavenly beings, crowned with glory and honor, that our choices matter, and that we can vote with our lives, every details of our lives, for the justice and love that God desires to see on earth as it is in heaven. We're being invited to move from passive indifference to embrace our power to do good. And Jesus is inviting us to live and pray this prayer: Lord, lead us in the way of justice. The fifth beatitude, Jesus said, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. I think our first instinct, and it's how we actually develop our sense of a moral compass, is to ask, who's the good guy and who's the bad guy in the story? Or am I a good boy or a bad boy, or a good girl or a bad girl? We learn to label and to judge. And we tend to measure ourselves and others with a critical eye. Are they doing what they should? Am I doing what I should? And this leads to a lot of bitterness and contempt in our lives. So the posture for this is that pointing finger, looking down the nose, labeling and judging. But with this beatitude, Jesus invites us to move away from that tendency towards judgment and contempt, to learn to see ourselves and others with eyes of compassion. Hold up your hands like this in the shape of the heart in front of your face. And I want to remind you that when God looks at you, God sees you through eyes of compassion because of the finished work of Jesus. And if we can learn that God's gaze on us is so tender and loving, it empowers us to also learn to see ourselves and others in that same way. I'm going to invite you to take a big risk, and that's if you're close to someone right now, I want you to look at them through the shape of the heart with your hands. Look them right in the eye. A lot of times we don't look people right in the eye, and it causes a bit of giggling, but look intently and remember who you're looking at. Someone that the creator of the universe calls beloved. See them for who they really are, and pay attention to what thoughts and feelings come up in your heart as you look at them in this way. And also as you recognize that you're being looked at in such a tender and compassionate way. This beatitude invites us to live and pray the prayer, Lord, lead us in the way of compassion. The sixth beatitude, Jesus says, blessed are the pure in heart. One thing I love about young kids is that they have no filter. If they're happy, you know it. If they're sad, you know it. If they want something, they'll just ask for it. But over time, you and I came to realize that we became divided. And we realized maybe it's not safe for me to share what my true thoughts and feelings are. And so we created what psychologists call a persona or mask, a way of hiding behind an image of ourselves, a way of posturing. There's probably never been a generation that's learned to do this more than our always-on social media environment, where we're often monitoring and projecting how we would like to be seen by others because we're afraid of being known for who we really are. Well, with this beatitude, Jesus is inviting us away from that dividedness and that hiding and pretending to step out of the shadows and into the light where we're seen by God and where we can be truthful, wholehearted, and honest with one another. And if you want, you can put some jazz hands with this posture. This beatitude invites us to live and pray this prayer. Lord, lead us in the way of right motive, into wholeheartedness. I love it that First John, sometimes when we hear the words purity of heart, we think that means perfect. But in First John it says, if we confess our mistakes and failures, God is just and will forgive us and purify us and lead us in the way of righteousness. And so purity of heart is about being honest, first with God and then with a few trusted others, to say, here's who I am, warts and all. Love me, accept me, hold me, and help me. Seventh beatitude, Jesus says, blessed are the peacemakers. Well, one of our first instincts, and maybe it's how we help ourselves feel safe, is to think in terms of us and them. My family, your family, my country, your country, my faith tradition, your faith tradition or beliefs, my sports team, your sports team, the things I like and the things you like that are different than mine. And we create these divisions between us. And it's the cause of so much strife in our world. And as I noted earlier, we're in a time of extreme divides. What does the gospel say about this? Jesus said that we are being invited to move from this posture of us versus them. Try this posture with me. To stop doing that dividing and learn to reach past our differences, to connect and embrace one another as family. Because of the reality that though there are differences between us, what we have in common is greater than anything that could divide us, because we are all sons and daughters of one divine parent. And so do this posture with me, remembering that this beatitude invites us to live and pray the prayer, Lord, lead us in the way of peacemaking. The eighth beatitude, Jesus said, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness or justice. Often it feels good to do good. But what about those times when you do good or you're just minding your own business and someone slanders you, is ungrateful, or even falsely accuses you when you know you've done what's right? How do we deal with that? I know for me, my first reaction when I'm mistreated is to want to retaliate. And this is that posture of the first instinct. Think 1930s silent movie. Oh yeah, wise guy, you want a piece of me? We want to get back at those who have hurt us. But with great wisdom, Jesus invites us from this posture of aggression and retaliation towards nonviolent resistance and a surrender to suffering. It says that Jesus was silent before his accusers. He said, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, that you may be sons and daughters of your Creator. He said, turn the other cheek. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. If we always respond or react defensively, we perpetuate evil in this world. And that's why Jesus invites us away from that to nonviolent resistance and surrender. When we do that, when we turn the other cheek, when we love our enemies, we break the cycle of evil and we cast our vote for love. And love will finally win. So this beatitude invites us to live and pray, Lord, lead us in your way of surrender. And finally, last beatitude, Jesus says, blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Our first instinct is to live out of a small sense of ourselves, to live out of fear and self-protection, and I would dare say even cowardice, where we're all about self-preservation. And what this assumes is that we're alone in the universe. And it's the cause of, I think, not standing up to the strong man, to those who would seek to guide us in unhelpful ways. And this is why Jesus invites us from this posture of smallness and fear to move from fear and cowardice into the posture of radical love as he did. Jesus had to face his fears in order to offer his life for us on the cross. He struggled in the Garden of Gethsemane to the point where blood vessels popped on his forehead. Can I go through with this? And what allowed Jesus to give his life and to live so and love so radically was the hope that death is not the end, that life comes after life. And that is the cornerstone of the Jesus story. And for those who follow him, that we have hope in life after life. And that means there's no fear in love. Perfect love casts out fear. How would you live if you weren't afraid to die? What's worth giving your life for? What are you holding back from because you're still in this posture of fear and cowardice? Jesus is inviting us to move into this posture. If anyone would come after me, they must deny themselves, take up their cross and follow me. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. What empowers us to live and love so radically is the understanding that we're intimately connected to the Trinity, that God cares for us, and that nothing can separate us from what is most essential to our well-being. And so this beatitude invites us to live and pray this way. Lord, lead us in the way of radical love. One of the results is that I feel like if my friend Shinko asked me that question today, Mark, when you wake up each morning, what do you seek to do and to be as a follower of Jesus? I feel like I'd have a much better response for him. I could say, Shinko, when I wake up each day, I want to live with open hands in trust. I want to lament what's broken in me and around me in this world. I want to walk in humility and honor the dignity of others. I want to seek justice. I want to look with compassion. I want to live in purity of heart and right motive. I want to seek peace with others. I want to surrender to suffering and vote for good in the world, in this cosmic struggle. And I want to lay down my life for others, to not live in fear, but to live in radical love. That's the invitation, I believe, of the ninefold path of Jesus that we see in the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount. Before I go, I just want to say, we learn by doing, not just by thinking. And so my invitation to you would be to get my book, The Ninefold Path of Jesus, and read through the longer descriptions of what Jesus was getting at with each of these Beatitudes. But more than that, to take on some new practices that will help you. There's a suggested journal entry, a daily habit, and then a new risk to try, inspired by the words of Jesus. And then see where it takes you and what happens. If you're part of a faith community right now and there's small groups, I'd invite you to join with others in working through these Beatitudes together and taking on practices together to see what happens as a result. I want to leave you with this prayer, and thank you for listening to my message today. Almighty Creator, may we live with open hands, mourn what's broken, serve with self-respect, use our power for good, look with compassion, walk in honesty, reach past differences, suffer for love, and live fearlessly, following your way of radical love. Amen. And all the best.